Movie opens with a girl named Ashley chatting on a video call with her best friend about a specific house. However, they're interrupted when Ashley hears a knock on the door, so she quickly hides her books and a map beneath the bed and invites the person to enter, but there's just silence on the other end. She freezes in fear when her friend reminds her that her family is not home. Seconds later, there's another knock on the door, so a nervous Ashley opens it yet finds no one on the other side. The friend grows worried, but Ashley states it's probably her sibling messing with her. She then heads to the living room, but doesn't see anyone, unaware that a mysterious figure is lurking nearby. Ashley returns to her room and tells her friend that there was no one. But then, when she shuts the door, the scene then abruptly cuts to a couple, Chuck and Maria, touring a house with their realtor, Bonnie. Bonnie mentions that this place costs the same price as the previous house, but is twice the size, which immediately raises a red flag in Chuck's mind. But Bonnie assures him it has been on the market for 3 years, so the seller is highly motivated. The couple appears impressed, right when Chuck's younger sister, Isabel, arrives. Chuck excitedly tells her that the house will have plenty of space for her art, but Isabel appears unimpressed. The movie then takes us to the first chapter from Chuck's point of view, days after they buy the house. When he notices the house is leaking, he immediately calls Bonnie to complain, and even takes a photo to send her. Chuck then heads to Maria's studio, where she makes dresses and does live streams. His gaze is drawn to an eerie mannequin, Martha, which he dislikes, but Maria insists that it's all she has left from her first studio. Here we catch a glimpse of Martha, who has turned her head. Next, Chuck steps outside to check the roof when he's approached by a neighbor named Larry. The two begin chatting, during which Larry reveals that the previous owner of the house took his own life, which shocks Chuck. Later at home, he reviews the pictures he had taken to send to Bonnie, but a cold wave of fear sweeps over him as he notices a gun in one of the photos that was clearly not there before. The next morning, Chuck wakes up and sees something shocking outside the house, and immediately informs Maria. He then heads downstairs, where we notice Martha standing eerily under a tree. Larry approaches to see what happened, but Chuck brushes it off, saying his sister probably put the mannequin outside as a prank. Larry then reveals that Maria had told him about Isabel struggling to cope after her mother's car accident. To add, this town has a history of people taking their own lives, and those struggling with depression are especially vulnerable to someone called her. Chuck wonders what her means, but Larry suggests he read the town's history at the local library and leaves. In the afternoon, a curious Chuck heads to the library to look for information on the town. But there, he's bewildered to see a stack of books suddenly topple onto the floor, since they weren't there moments before. He then comes across a distressed Ashley, who is crying alone. She pleads with him to put the book down and leave the town, but Chuck doesn't understand what she's trying to say. He asks if she needs any help, but she denies it. As Chuck leaves the library, he notices a poster for a community called Friends of Gardening, which piques his interest. The next evening, Chuck arrives at the Friends of Gardening meeting, where he meets Larry and a few other townspeople. However, it quickly becomes apparent that the meeting is not about gardening, but something else. We then learn that Ashley took her own life last night, and the group fears that more disasters are about to come. They discuss how everyone in town has lost their loved ones to someone called her, and warn that even if they flee the town, she will never leave them. Upon hearing all this, a confused Chuck asks who they are talking about, and why they keep saying her. A man reveals that they are speaking of Helen Foster, a woman who has been inflicting terror in the town for decades. That is why this meeting is held in secret, and people avoid saying her name for fear of being hurt. Here, the group explains that the only way to stop her is to find 825 Forest Road, where Helen lived in the 1940s, and where she took her own life. but no one can locate the place anymore, as it has been erased from all public maps. Amid the discussion, Larry notices someone's presence on the stairs. When he approaches, he glimpses Helen's ghost drifting eerily across the hallway. Panic grips him, so he signals the others, at which point the group abruptly ends the meeting and rushes out. As they leave, Chuck notices a chilling figure sitting alone in the church. The movie then cuts to Chapter 2, shifting the focus to Isabel and her struggles. We learn that she has been experiencing severe emotional distress since her mother's death. Furthermore, since moving into the house, her nights have been plagued by disturbing dreams about her late mother, which leave her shaken every time. One evening, Chuck asks about the progress of the therapy she has been undergoing. His attention is then drawn to a sketch she created that looks almost identical to their new home, but the strange part comes when Isabel reveals that she drew it 2 or 3 years ago. Another drawing catches his attention, depicting a girl standing in a corridor with ghostly hands reaching out from the shadows. The siblings then begin discussing their late mother, recalling how she used to stack dishes into a pyramid, and leave a note that said, "They won't put themselves away." Days later, Isabel is visited by her new school friend, Luke, whom she takes to her room. The curious girl begins asking him about the town, and he reveals that the place has long been rumored to be haunted. He tells her that years ago, a man hanged himself in the library with a stack of books, and that the same damn stack still appears on its own, as witnessed by countless people. Luke further reveals that it all traces back to Helen Foster, a woman who lived here half a century ago. Her daughter was relentlessly bullied at school, so Helen flooded the school, the bully's family, and even the town council with desperate letters, but no one listened. One day, her daughter took her own life, after which Helen spiraled out of control. Consumed by grief and fury, she murdered the bully and their parents, before shooting herself with a shotgun. Rumor has it that she used to live at 825 Forest Road, but that address no longer appears on any current map, and the town's old maps have been sealed under court order since the 1950s. Here a stunned Isabel realizes that the town is far more dangerous than it seems. In the next scene, Isabel and Maria go to an art gallery, where the two women begin to bond. Maria reveals that she has bipolar disorder, and takes medication, which mostly keeps her stable. She explains that, even though Chuck doesn't understand these kinds of things, she understands what Isabel is going through. This touches Isabel, but moments later, they hear a girl screaming in the distance. An urgent announcement is then made that the gallery is to be immediately closed. Isabel glances at a drawing and is shocked to see a figure of a woman appearing in it, which wasn't there before. That night, Isabel is sleeping peacefully when her closet light suddenly turns on by itself, jolting her awake. And so, she turns off the light. But then, the annoyed girl then ends up removing the bulb, which she places on her bedside table. But panic grips the poor girl as the closet light flickers again. To make matters worse, ghostly hands emerge from the closet, causing her to scream in sheer horror. Fortunately, it was just a nightmare, but a shiver of terror runs through Isabel when she sees the bulb lying on her bedside table. Sometime later, Isabel meets with Luke, and confides that her nightmares are growing increasingly worse. She wants to find Forest Road, but Luke strongly advises against it. He reveals that, according to rumors, Ashley and her friends were also looking for the house, and she may have found it, after which disturbing things began happening to her. Just then, Isabel gets a call from Chuck asking her to come home, as he wants someone to stay with Maria. The worried girl rushes home, where she finds Maria distressed and crying. She asks what happened, but Chuck just urges her to pack, and says he will be back soon. Later, while Isabel is packing her stuff, Luke arrives to check if everything's okay. He notices her picture with her mother, and states that he just met her mother, who appears to be very nice. This horrifies Isabel, and when she asks what he means, Luke reveals that her mother let him inside the house. The shocked girl reveals that her mother is dead, but he claims it's the same woman in the photo, and she even introduced herself as Isabel's mother. The two begin to worry, and they soon hear a shattering sound from downstairs. The duo carefully walks down the hall, but there's no one there. The terrified Luke then states that he must have been mistaken and rushes home. Suddenly, Isabel hears a woman's voice calling her name from the kitchen, insisting it's her mommy. This fills the poor girl with emotion, and she follows the sound, even though Maria appears and pleads with her not to go there. The voice says, "These dishes won't put themselves away," and Isabel notices broken dishes scattered across the kitchen floor. Soon, she comes face to face with a ghostly figure, sending both her and Maria fleeing in horror, but they find the front door locked. Isabel rushes to her room, and locks herself inside, only to hear Maria's screaming voice echoing through the house. The scene then shifts to chapter 3, which focuses on Maria, and begins when the family first arrives to tour the home. Days later, she and Chuck are seen in the car, talking about Isabel, who is clearly not doing well. Chuck dismisses therapy as a scam, but Maria points out that Isabel was driving the car when her mother died, which must have had a big impact on her. She therefore insists that they should give the girl some time to cope. Later at home, Maria notices Chuck reading the town's history, and he reveals that in 1953, all the town's street names were changed, and its borders were redrawn. Their house had originally been listed as 15 Rose Lane. And then, when Maria heads to the kitchen, she finds dishes oddly stacked with a note on top reading, "They won't put themselves away." She assumes Isabel did it, and asks Chuck to tell Isabel to put the dishes away. Days later, Maria is doing a live stream in her studio, right when we notice the mannequin, Martha's, hands moving behind her. She soon receives a call from her sister, who likely wants to warn her about the strange situation, but Maria ignores it. When her sister calls again, Maria assumes it's about the bridesmaid dresses, and proceeds to show them on camera, just as we see Martha's head turn. Moments later, she receives a text from a friend, warning her to get out of the house immediately. Maria doesn't think much of it, but this is when she realizes that the mannequin is gone, right before a loud crash is heard in the distance, so Maria carefully steps outside. To her horror, she notices Martha standing inside another room. And then all of a sudden, in the next scene, we see Chuck and Maria burning the mannequin outside. He later questions whether she has been taking her medication regularly, suggesting it might explain the incident, but a frustrated Maria reveals that thousands of people saw Martha move. Chuck apologizes, and says they can move to another place, but he just needs a little time. Just then, Isabel arrives, so he asks her to pack her things, saying he will be back shortly. After Isabel heads upstairs, Maria heads to the kitchen, where she notices the dishes stacked again with a note that says, "Hello Maria." This confuses the woman, but she simply walks away, right when she hears the sound of dishes shattering. Shortly after, a ghostly voice calls Isabel, and urges her to come to her mom. The scene then cuts to Isabel and Maria rushing upstairs, and locking themselves in their respective rooms. But Maria's door swings open by itself. Seconds later, the ghost appears, causing her to let out a blood-curdling scream. Isabel hears the scream, just as Maria arrives at her room, and the two women cling to each other in fear. But Isabel suddenly asks what happened to Maria's face, and we notice that Maria's nose is bleeding. The scene then cuts to chapter 4, titled Forest Road, where we see Maria lying sick in bed with Chuck sitting beside her. He soon hears the doorbell ring, and leaves. Downstairs, it turns out to be Luke, who has arrived with an important discovery. he shows Isabel and Chuck how Ashley had found the house. Even though all of the old maps had been removed, the town council had forgotten to update one critical thing: the city's power grid map. They are now able to pinpoint the exact location of 825 Forest Road by following the old power lines. Chuck and Isabel decide to head there, but just then, the doorbell rings again. It turns out to be Bonnie with a cameraman, who wants to record a testimonial for her promotion. Chuck says it's not a good time since his wife isn't feeling well. Surprisingly, Maria comes downstairs looking completely fine, and says she can do it. However, Isabel senses something is wrong, and asks Luke to stay with Maria until they return, which he agrees to. After the siblings head for Forest Road, Maria gets ready for the camera, but she keeps glancing at Luke with an angry expression. Bonnie asks for her introduction, but Maria only gives her first name, even when the realtor prompts her for her full name. Confused, Bonnie asks how they found her real estate company, but Maria shockingly begins talking about her daughter, saying she used to come home from school in tears. The realtor tries to steer the conversation back to the subject, but Maria continues to describe how, after the crying, she discovered blood in her daughter's bathroom sink. On the other hand, Chuck and Isabel finally arrive at the house, which is tucked deep within the forest. They break inside, and search for anything that can confirm this is Helen's house, after which Chuck plans to burn the whole place down. In the interview, Maria, who is clearly possessed by Helen Foster, begins recounting how she sent countless letters to the bully's family, the Clarks, detailing all the abuse her daughter endured. But the bullying only got increasingly worse, and even though the school promised to do something, they never did. Here, Maria's nose suddenly begins bleeding. Meanwhile, in the forest house, Chuck finds a box hidden under the floor, and discovers a letter Helen had written to the Clark family about how her daughter, Mary, was being bullied by their child. To his shock, he realizes that this forest house actually belongs to the Clarks, while Helen used to live at 15 Rose Lane, which is now Chuck's house. Panicked, he immediately rushes to find Isabel so they can escape, but he sees her standing motionless in front of a door. Back to a possessed Maria, she is still bleeding and again begins recounting how her daughter came home crying. A horrified Luke asks who her daughter is, and she responds, Mary. When he asks where Mary is, she yells that she's dead, and lets out a high-pitched scream, right when Helen appears in her true ghostly form, causing everyone to run in terror. Luke rushes to the kitchen, and hears Helen attacking Bonnie and the cameraman and seemingly killing them. The terrified boy hides behind the dining table. And then all of a sudden, in the forest house, Isabel apologizes, saying she had already seen this before. Suddenly, the ghost places its hand on Isabel's shoulder, exactly like the sketch she had made long ago. Chuck rushes to save his sister, but despite his best efforts, the ghost drags them both into the room. Following this, the movie ends by showing the house at 15 Rose Lane, which is now shrouded in eerie silence, while the fate